QuickBooks Online 2021 Pay Bills Form. Let's get into it with Intuit's QuickBooks Online 2021. Here we are in our Google search page. We're going to be searching for QuickBooks Online Test Drive, and then we're going to be selecting QuickBooks Online Test Drive from Intuit. It's then going to be verifying that we are not a robot, which I don't think is very fair. Looks like they're saying my good buddy C3PO is not allowed in the QuickBooks establishment. So I got Star Wars in my head there, but I'm back now. This is for serious. We're back into our test drive sample file for Craig's Design and Landscaping Services. We're going to continue looking at the forms that are going to be in the vendors section. So I'm going to select the new item here. We're in the vendors. Last time we looked at the bill. This time we're going to look at the pay bill forms, which as indicated by the name is going to be intimately related to the bill. So I think it's easiest to see this first in the flowchart. So let's go over to the QuickBooks desktop just to look at the flowchart. I just want to look at the flowchart over here in the vendor section. This is the typical flow that will happen. You're going to enter the bill. The bill will be increasing the accounts payable, a liability account, and the other side then going to typically an expense type of account. You're going to enter a bill as opposed to possibly entering simply a check or sometime a payment that would go directly out of the checking account. Those are the two ways that we might enter, say, normal bills into our QuickBooks system. One, by just entering a check that would decrease the checking account directly, or two, entering a bill which does not decrease the checking account directly, but rather increases a liability, and then we're going to pay the bill. Now, what are we going to be paying the bill with? We're going to be paying the bill with basically a check or some other kind of payment, which is basically a check or an expense type of form, which will be decreasing the checking account. Why isn't this form just simply called check then? Because this form, by being called pay bills, is going to give us an indication not only that it's a decrease to the checking account and therefore basically a check or a paycheck or an expense type of form for an electronic transfer or something like that, but also tell us that this is taking down or decreasing accounts payable directly. And therefore, if I want to see what the actual expense was for, I need to go back to the actual bill that increased the accounts payable, because that's where the account is affecting the actual income statement if it was for an expense amount. So let's take a look at that over here on QuickBooks Online. If I then select our item here and I say we want to go to the pay bills, we're going to see our screen that will be sorting out the bills. This screen looks a little bit different than some other forms that we might imagine, like an invoice or a bill or a check, because we're not actually importing or inputting data into the form, but rather simply selecting the bills that are outstanding that we want to then pay. So whenever we say the pay bills form, what that means is that there's going to be some decrease typically to like the checking account, and then the other side is going to be decreasing the accounts payable. That's what basically the pay bills form means. The actual form that we're going to be using might be something like a check or like an expense type of form. So if we go through this, then we've got the payment method, which will typically be the checking account most of the time. So we'll have the checking account here, the balance, the payment date, which will typically be the current date that we will be working in if we're working in real time. And then the check number, if we have the check number that we're going to be starting on, will be 71. If it's not going to be a check that we're going to be paying with, we may not put a check number there. It might be some kind of electronic payment. And if you wanted to then print it or print it later, then you could select this item here and actually print the check. So if you're going to print the checks and then give out the checks, mail out the checks, then this could be a good tool for that as well. But to do so, you still need to buy the checks separately. And then you'll have like pre-printed checks that you'd buy from the bank. And then you got to put them into the printer and make sure they're organized the right way. You got the right, face down or face up, however the printer works and whatnot. And then you're going to print on the check. But you can print all of them basically at the same time by using this system as well. So then down here we have the actual bills. These are going to be the bills that are outstanding. We could select the particular bills that we want to pay and then line them up and basically pay those bills. Or we can also select all of them by selecting this item up top. And then we can use our filtering options if we want to filter these items. Now, obviously, this screen doesn't have any bills here, so we can just imagine those 5 bills fairly easily. However, for larger companies, then they're going to have a lot of bills that are outstanding, and this is a great tool to be able to sort the bills that are outstanding and choose which of those bills that we want to be paying. We can also select sort by the payee over here. So we can click on these items and give alphabetical order by the payee, the reference number if necessary. The date is typically going to be the default because we want to see the ones that are due. The balance we can sort by, and the credit applied. Then we can also go to the filters up top, and we have the date range that we could be sorting in. And then we could sort by basically the payee, which is typically mostly vendors, or we could sort by overdue status. So checking this and applying out, then we have the overdue status there. If I go back on this and I uncheck and apply out, so then now we're back to basically normal. Let's go ahead and just pay one of these just for an example. So I'm gonna check off this one. I'm gonna say that we're not gonna have a check number because it's basically gonna be an electronic transfer. So I'm gonna delete the check number, and I'm not gonna print the check. Also note over here this cog, just to note, it shows you the number of rows, so you can change the number of rows that will be shown in one at a time. So you can adjust that as well if you have a whole lot of checks that will be involved here. So then I'm going to go ahead and process this. So I'm going to process this. What's this going to do when I say enter? It's going to basically, let's do 2 of them at a time actually here. Let's do the 1124, and then let's do the 12.9 items. So we can do 2 of them at one time. So then I'm going to go down here. We got a couple different options. We got save and close. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close the item. And then now let's go to our financial statements and see where we can find those on the financial statements. To do that, I'm going to go to the reports down below. So we're going to go to the reports. We're then going to go to, let's go to the balance sheet. I'm going to close the hamburger over here, which is going to close the side window. I'm going to hold down Control and scroll up a little bit so that we can see more. So I'm at 150% now. I'm going to scroll up so we can see this information at the top, which you can't really see when you go right into the report. And then now you can see we're in January. So we actually paid this, I believe, in the current date, which for me is going to be the January 4th. So then we should see that activity then in the checking account down here. So we got checking account. So I'm going to go into the checking account, drill down on the checking accounts to see the impact on it for those 2 items. And there we have it. Now we got the pay bill item. I'm going to hold down Control and scroll down a bit. So we got the pay bill. Notice it's still kind of like a check type of form because that's the form that they use to decrease the checking account, of course, but it also tells us it's a special one. It's a bill payment. The fact that it's a bill payment tells us that it didn't just go the other side of the transaction, isn't going to an expense account, but rather decreasing the accounts payable. We also know that because the split account over here also says accounts payable. So we have those items, and if I then click on this item, we're not going to go back to the same data input screen, but rather to a screen that looks like this. It looks like a similar data input screen, but it's the pay bill item that we have down here, and then the bill is selected down below, the bill that was paid for this particular item. So this is the source document. Now, if I want to know what this bill was actually for, or the expense account it went to, then I got to go to the actual bill, which has a nice link here. So then I can go actually to the bill, which was the first thing was entered. And this bill then is what was increased. This caused the increase to the accounts payable, and the other side then went to this expense account down below, that be the gas and utilities. So you get this nice audit trail. So I can close this back out, and then this is the other one. This is the second one that happened, and you get that nice basically audit trail. Now if I change the dates, I'm going to bring this back to 2021. Let's go from 2020 to 2021. Run that transaction detailed report. We can see basically the activity that's going to be in the checking account, and you'll see that we have the checks that are going to be the pay bills, and we also have basically expense items, which are going to be basically a check type form as well, except that it's not going to have a check number, so it's going to be a similar type of form, decrease in the checking account. And then we also have a check, which this one is one where we actually have a physical check with basically a check number. So this one, we have a check number. You can see it here. The form here is going to be much the same. So we have a check item, we have a check number, and then on the bottom half, in this case, we bought inventory. So that's what the other half said. But the check form means we're decreasing the checking account. And then we can see that that if we have the expense form, like this one, here's an expense type of form, it's basically the same type of layout here. So we've got the people that we are paying, and down here now we're paying for a job expense. The only difference really between a check form and expense form is that the check form is designed to basically include the check number, but in essence they're the same data input form. In QuickBooks Desktop, there's really no difference between the two forms. You just don't really put a check number in the form if it's not a check, but rather like an electronic payment or something like that. So here in Online, we got these two separate forms. So that's the only indication that's being made by those two. And then you have another check type of form, which is the bill payments check, which again is just a check form or a form that, in other words, decreases the checking account. But the fact that it's a bill payment tells you that the other side is going to accounts payable. It's paying down the payable account. So then if we scroll back up top, I'm going to scroll back up top, and the other side is going to be in the payable account. So if I go then into the accounts payable here, so here's the AP liability account, and we go into that item, then we see the same form, the bill payment form. This is decreasing the balance to the payable, meaning this is a liability account. We owe the liability because we entered the bill in the past because we consumed something, didn't yet pay for it, therefore increased the liability, kind of like a credit card would work. And now we're paying off the liability with the bill payment. So the checking account went down, other side here going to the accounts payable. So we're decreasing the accounts payable by that 205 and that 8644. So again, note that there's no impact at this point in time to the income statement because we're paying down the liability. When was the income statement affected? When we entered the bill, that's when the income statement was had a transaction to it. Let's go ahead and go back to the forms then. Go back to the form, and I'm going to right click on this item again, and I'm going to duplicate it. So let's duplicate this one, and then we can run another report or do some other stuff with it if we so choose, and we're going to choose to do so. And so then we can go down and run our other report that's going to be supplemental to that accounts payable report. So if I go down to the reports down below and we run some information related to the accounts payable, I'm going to go down to the who owes, who you owe, what you owe, and then I'm going to look at the vendor balance detailed report, the vendor balance detailed report. This report, like all other reports, backs up or summarizes something on the balance sheet, in this case, the accounts payable. So now we got our vendors for the bills that are still outstanding, and we have the amount there at the 131123, which should tie out to the 131123 on the accounts payable here. So we can track it in that format. Also note, if I go back on to the second tab here, that if we go down to our expenses tab on the left, and then we go to our expenses up top, this is another way that we saw that we can sort out those open bills, or the bills in total and the open bills and the bill payments. So if I filter up top and I sort by type, and I want to look at the bills. Now we did the pay bill. If I want to look at the bills that were written before and then paid, I can select those items. These are all the bills. If I want to sort the bills that have not yet been paid still, after having paid some of them, 2 of them, then we can then say that I want to see the outstanding items, status, and we want to see the open ones. And then I'm going to say apply that out. So now we've got these open bills that are still basically outstanding. Another way to see this item, and the other way we could see this is if we went back to the new, and we went to pay bills again, right? So we went to vendors and pay bills. We'd see a similar kind of situation. So here's the 3 bills that are still outstanding and open. I'm going to close that back out. If I want to see the pay bills information, I can select the drop down, and we could say that, and this, you can imagine this if someone came and asked you, like, what are the recent bills that you paid, the bills that were outstanding that were paid. We can hit our filter or even reset it maybe. I can reset and then go back to the filters and say that we want to now search by the payments that were made, the bill payments, and then say apply. And then we can find our 2 checks. There's our 2 bill checks once again. For me, most of the time, if I was to look at the payments that were made, I like to go to the actual tax forms and find the check in the checking account or in the cash. If anything affects cash, that's typically the first place I will go to like kind of drill back down on it or audit back down onto it, or in this case, the accounts payable, which might be a little bit easier because there's less detail in it. Now, the other question you might get is if the vendor came back and said, I didn't get the check or something like that, and we wanted to verify it on our side, then we could search basically by vendor and the two payees. So, for example, if Norton Lumber called us, then we might sort our information by vendor here. We're searching out for Norton Lumber. So here's going to be Norton Lumber, and I'll select Norton here. And then if I go into it, we're going to say, oh yeah, there we go. We got the 1/4/21. That's when the payment happened. So it should have gone out. We sent it out. The check was in the mail in this case, according to our system. If they haven't received it, then what's the next step to see if it cleared the bank? Did it clear the bank? Let's wait a couple days and see if it clears the bank. If it doesn't, then we can go from there. So that's going to be an overview of the pay bill item.